Hello everyone and welcome to this next session of PragatiE Vichaar Poetry Festival. It is my immense pleasure that I'm introducing the three panelists for this session. Ms. Kala Ramesh, Mr. C P Surendran and Mr. Sudeep Singh. These are such eminent poets that I don't think they need any introduction, but let me still, for the audience, for them, let me still read a little bit about them. Ms. Kala Ramesh, a Pushcart Prize nominated poet, editor, and anthologist, is the founder and director of Triveni Haikai Media, India, and founder and managing director of Haiku Katha Journal. Author of Haiku for Children, published by Katha Books in 2010. Her book of Haiku and Haibun, Beyond the Horizon and Beyond, published by Vishwakarma Publications, was shortlisted for the Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize in 2019. Her third book, comprising of Tanka Tanka Prose and Tanka Doha, The Forest I Know, was published by HarperCollins in July 2021. A speaker at international haiku conferences, Ms. Kala received the W.E. Trailblazer Poet Teacher Award 2020 from Women Empowered India. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mr. C P Surendran is our next panelist. He is a poet, a novelist, screenplay writer, and a columnist. His latest volume of verse is available, Light, which is a collected poems preceded by Portraits of Space We Occupy, Canaries of the Moon, Posthumous Poems, and Gemini 2. One Love and the Many Lives of Osip B. is his fourth novel. The earlier ones are Hedal, Lost and Found, and An Iron Harvest. His columns have appeared in leading newspapers in India and abroad. He currently lives in Delhi. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Sudeep Singh, he is a poet, a translator, artist, and an editor. He is recognized as one of India's finest younger poets. He has published more than a dozen collections of poetry and worked as an editor on many anthologies, including the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry by Indians 2012 and Midnight Children, Post-Independence English Poetry from India 2004. He is the editorial director of Arc Arts and editor of Atlas, a journal of new writing and art. He is the first Indian to be honored with an invitation to participate at the 2013 Nobel Laureate Week in St. Lucia, where he delivered the Derek Walcott Lecture and read his own poetry. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
So we want to today go through and talk about the spontaneous overflow of feelings. But before we do that, our audience would love to hear, some poetry from you guys. So can I please request you to read us something from your vast expanse of work you have done?
Yes.
So ma'am, can we start with you?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
I'll start off with haiku, and then maybe one or two haibun, and then one or two tanka. Tanka is a 5-line poem. So I start off with haiku now. A hawk takes off. A hawk takes off. After a while, I touch down. A hawk takes off. After a while, I touch down. Firefly hitching a ride on its own light. Firefly hitching a ride on its own light. Sleepless, a swaying web catches and loses the light. Sleepless, a swaying web catches and loses the light. I come to a short, very short haibun. Haibun is prose embedded with a haiku, but I think I'll be reading a haibun. I mean, tanka prose, which is prose embedded with a tanka poem, which is 5-line. Azadi, the diamond mesh fence has lived its life. Over many monsoons of neglect, it seems to have rusted and given way in places. With the sudden unwinding of once galvanized wires, one by one, the rusted links unclasp, as if they know what it is to take off into the unknown and fill the sky with birds like birds in flight, breathing azadi, the freedom to be. A million daydreams get buried at sundown. A million daydreams get buried at sundown. Both Paraya and non-Paraya walk the fallen leaf path. Uncaged, bringing my thoughts back to the present, I've been at this game for the last hour, swaying between yesteryears and tomorrow. The mind sneaks its muddy paws, 1 foot behind and 1 foot forward, faster than light or sound, covering great distances. Indescribable is the word that describes this machine sitting smugly within the body. Where is this mind? And how does it function? Even yogis and seers couldn't fathom it. And still, the power it wields over my emotions. Pre-dawn, cloudburst, waves, wave patterns, and raindrops woven in sand become the ocean. Pre-dawn, cloudburst, wave patterns, and raindrops woven in sand become the ocean. I'll be reading a few tanka to you. Tanka is a 5-line poem which is much older than haiku. My family wept over our dog's death. My family wept over our dog's death. I weep for those days I grudged him his early morning walk. My family wept over our dog's death. I weep for those days I grudged him his early morning walk. Flight passengers swarm around the conveyor belt. Flight passengers swarm around the conveyor belt. The freedom to walk away without baggage. Does the shadow move with the swing or the swing with the shadow? Interlaced, my shadow rides on time. Does the shadow move with the swing or the swing with the shadow? Interlaced, my shadow rides on time. Mother laments, being old and bent. Mother laments, being old and bent. I see her as a curved branch laden with fruit. I see her as a curved branch laden with fruit.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for that, ma'am. That was fabulous. Let us now move to CP sir. Sir, if you want to, if you can please. Sir, you are on mute. Sir, you are on mute. Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Kapil. I'm very happy that I am part of the the group here. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to read a rather longish poem. Normally, I don't do that, but I'm going to do this to tax your patience as well as mine. So you may have to need to pay a little bit of attention on this. And this poem of mine is called actually "I Am Nearly Not There," right? And I have been going through a certain kind of situation of late, and I've been, I think, 1.5 years ago or so. One of the things I identified myself with was Arthur Rimbaud, the French symbolist poet's, social isolation and his own need not to write, right? So Rimbaud's best poems were written before 23, and then he became a gunsmith and a trader in the far off African deserts. So this poem is a kind of a social, an objective correlative of my situation at that time. So I'll read this. I'm nearly not there. I think we are on 2:17, so I have 5 minutes. I may take 3 minutes of this. I am not concerned with that anymore. Arthur Rimbaud. A memory of yesterday troubles a remembered prayer, persistent like smoke from an eternally dying fire. Soul, soul, why do you persecute me? The road to Damascus disperses lines in France's sea of wines. Sometimes the occult of the word brings to pass a world that another word, spirits willing, will surpass. At its heart, the magic of the letters is black. It is a trick of science sidestepping time. A word conjuring up a family farce with Verlaine, or another is sodomy and shame. Send enough seas spinning around the sun is gay rights and fame. The mob, good or bad, passing the sentence is always the same. Onward to London, Brussels and back, a bullet buried in the wrist of a writing hand, the exile fleeing land after land. A writer of complaints to Isabel, and dour, dark-mouthed mom, sometimes a teacher, once almost a clown in a circus in Stockholm, then a soldier ditching the Dutch flag, walking across Java, island adrift among the stars, pushing at the frontiers of an accident, in a trance, returning empty like the sea to France. A little more writing which no one wants, ink expended on sands. To Cyprus, quarrying stone, inanimate, hard, like a rake's heart. But these things drown fast. Always back to France, and then by ship through evenings of straw, by a sea green as leaves of the licorice, sailing away from cafes, fame and cabals, lit cities shimmering, sliding one beneath the other in receding waves. Sober as a glass of absinthe undrunk, empty as a sea emptying on Aiden's shores, where the sands halt the anabasis of undone kings. Cratered faces next to stranded trunkless legs, considering their works against the distance. There the fire and smoke of day and night start and end without hope or grace. To Harar by camel across so much sand, the bottom half of the universal hourglass, here they are, all those who ran out of their time, incubating silence, the air and exhalation of a dragon's ire, and on the head, made to measure the sun, a crown of fire in a rim of thorns. In the shadow of thorns, in the shade of the rose, in the silicates of silence, perpetual revelations, loathing of the self, the object of a killer's desire, or a lover's, of excess and shame, in a deep house where cisterns fail, and down the steps, children wail in Amharic, emptying their bowels, squatting on the earth, an obscene act of protest in festive cities and scented talks on books and solemn deliberations on art. There is no joy, no peace, just an attempt to escape without a trace from the disease of naming things into the indifferent glaze where the old fades as a mask amidst a new race. There is no Christ in the desert, no salvation in the confessional space, but a trader's satisfaction in the ordinance of cartons and sacks, of foreign wares on foreign racks, the arrangement of the one ache in different shapes, cold anger at what camels broke on their backs, and an imagined remembrance of sanity, instilling the clamoring word with the yellow silence of sands, coffee, guns, or the beryl, mouth blown in the mold, glinting green and violet in the sun for the coronation of strange kings. The night is awake. The hyenas in the back, next to the slaughterhouse, giggle over bones. Out in the desert, the black tents of thieves flap in the wind, blowing down from Harar's hills. The ghosts in residence fumble, separate with blue fingers, dawn from dreams. A decade among the dunes. What if one sings or not? Think of the songs that found no voice, and still the desert confesses nothing. Nothing is the confession. So much trash to Zayla for the sea to bring up a steamer from its secret hold. In delirium, walk on water to Marseille and reach Zanzibar, to lose a leg in the war in France, wake up from opiates to find he is no more in Charleville or elsewhere. Though we must pray forever what he is owed, as if he is nearly here in barracks, bars, and brothels, the balance of a trade, not in barter, but in gold. I think I'm done with that. Thanks.
Fantastic, sir. That was just brilliant. Sudeep, sir, can we now hear from you, please? Sir, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Kala and CP. Good to follow you both. I thought of reading something else, but having heard CP's poem, I've changed my mind. I'm going to read something else because the poem itself is so much about the narrative and politics of language at an essential level. So this is a poem called Language from my new book, Anthropocene. This one is called Language, and it opens with an epigraph by Italo Calvino, and I quote, "Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally." My typewriter is multilingual, its keys mysteriously calibrating my bipolar forked tongue. Black, red silk ribbons, spools unwind as the carriage moves right to left. In cursive hand, I write from left to right. My tongue was born promiscuous, speaking in many languages. My heart spoke another, my head yet another, the translation seamless. Oracles, ventricles pump blood, corpuscle-like alphabets, phrases, syntax, cross-fertilize my text, breathing life. Texture enriched, music, cadence spatially enhanced, osmotic, polyglottal, a polygamy of grammar. Letter forms dance, ligatures pirouette, ascenders, descenders, pitch perfect. Imagination isn't caged in speech. Speech cannot be caged in language. The next poem is a really short one. It actually follows the tradition of what Kala has been perfecting for many, many years. It's part of the Waka tradition, which is Japanese poetry, and it's a kind of riff on a particular form called Sadoka. It's titled That Is. It's spelled I.E. And it's for my son Arya. And normally when I send him poems, he says, "Oh, Baba, yet another poem." Gosh. But this one, he at least responded saying, "Actually, it's really beautiful, but I have no idea what you're talking about." That is because you hear the sound of a lone rustling leaf. You hear the sea. That is because I consider the sea silent. You hear its silence in my studio. That is, and because of that, the silence will not empty the sea of its leaves. And the last one I'll read for purposes of keeping to time is a poem I've just chosen because of the wonderful infrastructure I have in my city and in my country. This is written around the time of the second wave of the pandemic when bodies were burning in Delhi. And of course, you know the history that the Rajpath, the Lachin's Delhi, is being dug up to make a Disneyland when we didn't have enough burial sites in our city. It's called Om, a Ceremony. It's the last poem of the book. Opens with a short epigraph from Goethe, and I quote, "Architecture of frozen music." It also alludes to one of my favorite Indian poets, Agha Shahid Ali's Country Without Post Office. So you'll hear two lines which are embedded in the poem. Om, a ceremony. In my city, I'm surrounded by constant cries of the dying, burning pyres heaving under burden of wood, smoke, bones, wailing summed up by sonic notes of Om. Civilization's first sound, Sanskrit syllable echoing a conch shell's harmonic mapping, its involute spiral geometry holding within and emanating airborne sonar screams. My ancestors, grandmothers, mother, blew into the smooth shell cupped in their palms, held intimately as if it were a talisman, a prayer, a pranayam in yoga's daily ritual. But breathing is a privilege these days. Pandemic struck, oxygen deprived, my friends perish. The country buckles airless. Even an exquisite ceremony lacks the sheen or wax to wrap the contours of a corpse now. Each day as I write endless condolence notes, etching dirge-like couplets on gravestones, my city continues to be dug up, not to make space for burial sites, but for palaces of illusion. An architecture of frozen music, greed, calumny. A country without a government, a country without a post office, Shahid laments. Let me cry out in that void. Say it as I can. I write on that void. Om celebration now and unceasing requiem. Yet we chant in hope for peace. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think it so well captures what we all went through, nearly this time last year in the month of April and May. I think it beautifully captures,
Thank you.
the agony that we all would have felt at that time.
And the thrill of certain kinds of powers to be, because they could clear out anything without any social mandate.
Yeah, sir, that becomes a very political domain. And being a political commentator, I will stay away from it a little bit. But no,
Sensible, wise man.
I fully hear you. Without favoring any side, I would definitely say that it should have been done better. That it should have been. I mean, even with everything else, the people making decisions should have been more sensitive to the agony, to the pain, to whatever everybody was feeling around. I mean, so that part I absolutely agree. And I don't think even the staunchest supporters of the government would kind of disagree with that. They may say it was the right thing to do. Was it the right thing to do at that point of time in that particular month? I mean,
I'm not talking about the government at all. You're talking about the government.
I understand that, sir. As I said, I'm a political commentator and supposed to be very irreverent at that. So I can. That's why I'm trying to not get into that event. I think with that brilliant poem, let's move forward. So let's now jump into a few questions. And the topic for the session today is the spontaneous overflow of feelings. There is a famous quote from Wordsworth that says, "Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility." In that context, if you can share your thoughts, please. Ma'am, can we start with you?
I think, okay. Of course, I totally agree with Wordsworth. I mean, nobody can deny that. But seeing it from the haikai lens, I know I'm just repeating what others have said before. The creative use of white space is as important a component as content in any of the arts, you would agree. In order to engage any audience, you need to leave something for them to do or add to the experience. The audience must be able to enter and walk around the work. In haikai language, we call it the semicircle of a haiku. We don't close it. That means we leave things unsaid. The white space is actually something that is unsaid. The door must be left ajar as invitation. How is this white space created? Every art form has its own ways of going about this. Music uses silence. Painting requires blank spaces or flat planes, surfaces or resting spaces. And dance requires moments of stillness. Poetry, like all other arts, should say enough, but not too much. That is what the haikai poets feel. They always tell us we should know when to stop. When we say, yes, it's over, the poem is done. So that the redundant pieces, the redundant lines are all taken away. And what ultimately is there is something that is replete or completely, strong in image building. Okay, if everything is complete, like if you complete the circle, if everything is complete and utterly finished, there is nothing left to engage the reader and the listener. And that is, I think, this is what he talks about when you talk about, when you've said about that emotion recollected in tranquility. I think we use that a lot when writing haiku. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you so much for that, ma'am. CP sir. Sir, you are on mute.
As usual. Yeah, I'm. I appreciate what Kada is saying, but of course, I don't believe neither in Wordsworth nor in Kada, of course. Because I don't actually understand the idea of tranquility. I don't understand the idea of powerful feelings recollected. I don't understand the idea of spontaneity, because Wordsworth himself, I think, bypassed a whole bunch of traumatic social and cultural and perhaps even political revolutions, and sat back in his village, wherever that was, and wrote. And I think his natural inclination would have been to be a geologist, to talk about the rocks more than actually human emotions. That's what I would think. And in my own writing process I'm not saying that that is something which is shared by other people, but I do not. For example, last 3 days or close to a week now, I've been trying to come up with one line which explains my last 2 weeks trips in Benares and Gaya and Lucknow and Allahabad, and I cannot do that, and because I find everything which is in constant flux in those places. There is not a moment of peace there. Forget the day life, the night life, everything is so agitated. The whole thing is in a huge flux, and then you come back to some relatively more peaceful place. There's nothing to recollect, really speaking, because you are not even able to name your emotions. Forget the spontaneity and the power of those feelings. And I would even like to ask, what does Wordsworth mean by tranquility, and how socially adjusted you must be to have a moment's peace? I mean, I don't know what he's talking about anymore. I mean, the entire society is agitated. The even poets and writers, they live in a constant state of disaffirmation. So where is all this thing coming from? These words have no meaning anymore to me, and I'm sorry that I'm sounding so harsh. In any case, I'm not a great admirer of Wordsworth, right? I would rather prefer Coleridge from that era, right? So basically, I'm saying that in none of these words, actually, that definition, the romantic definition of poetry, is balderdash. It is gone over. It's over. Really is over. Sorry about that.
No, I fully appreciate where you are coming from, sir. That constant.
But, 1 second, Surendra, when we are talking about silences, it is a musician, supposing she's creating something, there can be turmoil outside, but when she comes back to her art, isn't there something that is that sets her mood at peace and she's able to create something?
Well,
isn't that what we're talking about?
I'll wait for Sudeep to get in before I
Yes.
try
Yes,
to
okay.
answer your question.
Okay.
It's a good point. I'll try to answer the question, but Sudeep can get in, I think, now.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, see when you sent me the questions, and when I saw the title of the session, and I thought my agency was taken away from me completely. We didn't have a choice because I had no idea what to say, which poems to read, because it's not only Victorian, but it's prehistoric, the whole idea of recollection and tranquility. I understand philosophically, of course, where it comes from. Also, the problem is English lit students skate on the surface. These two phrases, recollection and tranquility, and spontaneous overflow of loveful feelings, are to do with a certain context. It was a manifesto that was partly being engaged in. If you remember the lyrical ballads, if you remember Matthew Arnold, who was one of the best critics of our time, of that time, still remains so. T.S. Eliot found a lot of inspiration from that. So this was a dialogue in theory between Coleridge and Wordsworth. The fact is, these leap out, and then these become gold standards or templates for other people to follow, and they follow it so blindly that they actually do not probe 1 inch deeper into the line itself, because the line is like a greeting card, a hallmark line. It's the most banal thing I've ever seen. I understand what it means, of course. Spiritually also, I understand what it means. But it is banal. And there is no room for banality in good poetry. So I was completely, I thought maybe you were being ironic because, finally a poetry program has irony in it, but I didn't see the irony, considering there'll be other questions saying eminence of Tagore, and I'm a Bengali. My God, I don't know how much I disliked Tagore when I was growing up. As an adult, I have a lot of respect for it, but I'll get to that. And we should also answer Kala's worry, because we do understand the spiritual nature and the inner calm and the peace and the meditative quality. All that is But that is obvious, isn't it? We don't have to, if we have to explain that this is what it means, then the line itself fails.
I would actually like to smoke what Wordsworth was smoking at that time, because the idea of meditational space which he had, all the words which he formulated, all the key words, if you really analyze it, all the key words are false categories now. So we can't even go into it, I think, with any sense of realistic rigor. But when Kala, for example, is talking about, and which I think Sudeep also mentioned, the meditative space. See, the writing, the good thing about writing is that if you're really into it, it is meditative, right? You are not thinking of anything else. You are aware of what you're doing. That's all you're doing. So there is a certain kind of meditative quality to any good writing, right? Or even attempts at writing, right? The idea of the exercising of the word on the page is meditative. But it takes a huge amount of willpower, discipline, and all these things in the kind of the fluidity of space we are occupying now. So and I think it makes some, there is a case for actually saying that one should be at peace while one is recalling what happened to one. But I don't think that that thing really exists anymore. You're constantly worried, and it could be because we are all going through a certain phase in history where our identities are constantly in question, right? One of the reasons why group identity politics is on the ascendant, and I am an individualist. In fact, I prefer individual rights to be more validated or valid than group rights. But the reason why this identity politics is so strong now is because you think that those things, those clubs will give you some sense of rootedness. But if you do that, the group element of any of any gathering, that thing which organizes that structure, the group structure, will eventually kill the individual element in your practice. So poetry would suffer from it. I'm sorry, I'm
the way I was into music first, and even now, when whatever turmoil there is in my mind, when I'm able to relax in music and in its silences and its spaces, it does calm me down. Not always are we writing where we are writing a poem at the moment of every action that is happening over there. We come back and then we are going to write within our phone walls. And there, it can be a chaotic mind, it can be a chaotic world outside, but when you start putting your words down, aren't we into that thought, into that moment, into that feeling of writing something that we forget the I? We always say the ahambhavam is forgotten when we are writing something, or when we are singing something, when we are painting something. I mean, that is what I meant by tranquility. It is not always that I don't come back and then I see a dead dog on the road. I don't come back and I'm agitated, I write a poem. It takes me some time to pen that word, and by that time I am calm. We can't always be in an agitated world. I mean, that is the way I see it. Maybe I'm far away, but I am in a haikai, and I see the things through the haikai lens, which is very calming.
I read that poem. It's all about tranquility and silence. I mean, it's yes. I prefer to just sort of lead by example rather than pontificate on it.
Yes. No, when we write a poem, ultimately what the poem gives the other person is maybe some moments of peace, some moments of silence. If I can do that, I have done it.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So my next question was about the importance of emotions in being a poet, in writing poems. I guess we have discussed some bits and pieces of that already in this
Yes.
first one, but let's still hear your thoughts on this particular question. This time, let's change the order. Sudeep sir, can we start with you?
Sure. Again, emotion is it's the first point of entry, really. And without that, the poem doesn't start. If you're completely insensitive, I suspect, you won't be sensitized to be able to think or move at a very basic level. But for a poem, for me, a poem ultimately, when it's published and it's out there, it's a piece of text, it's a piece of sculpture, it's a piece of art. I don't know how good or bad it is. It's up to other people to decide. But for that piece to work, just emotion is not going to be enough. So for me, content and craft are equally important, if not more important. The emotion is just a springboard where you dive. Anybody can dive off a springboard. Actually, no, not anybody can dive off a springboard. Many of us will feel fear to dive off a springboard. But assuming that we can dive off a springboard, we are not doing too much. We are allowing gravity to pull us and we get into the water. The craft and content is, think about these wonderful Olympian high divers, who twist and turn and somersault and make an entry into the water in a particular angle. That takes years and years of gymnastics, yoga, breathing, practice, breaking rules, making new rules. The same thing applies with poetry. So just the emotion that I want to dive will be like Icarus, you won't go very far. But if you want to control the flames that will burn you, then the content and craft comes in, and all the three things put together make a particular piece of art, in this case a poem. How you calibrate it is an individual quest. So if you think of a music mixing board, the three elements, emotion, craft, and content, would be the three switches: the bass, the mid-range, and the treble. And how you want the frequency of the song to come across to you, you can balance it the way you want. But all those three things need to operate hand in hand, in sync, for it to be successful.
Yes.
Perfectly said, sir. CP sir.
Just call me CP here. I'm right now I'm in some village in a small room which belongs to my friend, and she doesn't call me sir, and although she is junior to me, so I don't see why you should be calling me sir.
You can call him CP, madam.
Yeah.
These days it's gender fluid,
So the emotion thing, although Sudeep is absolutely correct, right? But see, my entire idea of writing is to, if I am unable to come up with a phrase which, to my mind, doesn't or fails to reorder the universe, I know it sounds very pompous, but that is my aspiration, right? If I can't do it, there's no point in actually writing it. There's really no point. And so when you do that, there is a new order, right? Either on the page or on somebody's mind, there's a new order, right? But that order is not order. It is actually something emerging out of a state of disturbance. So my intention is to disturb you. My intention is not to give you peace. That is not my intention. That never has been my intention. The world doesn't give me peace, and I have no intention to give the world back any peace either.
Sure.
I'll see to it as far as it's possible within me to disrupt the world. So, but what Sudeep says, what Sudeep said about emotion, one of the things I am finding, although he says that the springboard, which is true, it is a springboard, you have to come with the right word and the right craft to convey it. But what I am beginning to realize also is that, 70 to 80% of the time when I'm reading something, that emotion doesn't come through. This is because, you are actually trying to find emotion from words, which are dead things. To my mind, words should be dug out of emotion. It is a very difficult job because, that phrasing, which I earlier mentioned about the reordering of the universe, comes from that. So Sudeep is right, and because I find it very difficult to agree with anyone completely, I must of course come up with this point of mine. Uh, yeah, and the other thing which may be in kind of associated with this thing about emotion is that, a poem is a naming of an emotion. Everything, you have an emotion, you name it, and that name must ring a bell. That name must associate with, that name should associate a lot of things with the feelings in you. That's a very difficult job. I think it's a, and for me certainly increasingly that's a difficult job. Because the output from other people, from the existing legacy, heritage, tradition is so much to sidestep that and come up with a new insight, which kind of throws an ordinary looking table, you know, you know, or convert a stone into a step. That's which is lying there. A stone on the earth and the ground is a stone, right? But to convert that into a step, either to go up or to come down, that is a problem, really a problem. The craftsmanship is very, very important. I agree.
Sure, sir. Kala ma'am?
I would like to go back to 20 years back when I was into music. And I'd given my first concert, and I got a very good review from Datta Marulkar, Pune Marathi paper, where he mentioned about my concert, but he used a term, emotional austerity. So I called him. I was following Kumar Gandharva's style, Gaiki. So I called him and I thanked him and I said, I'd like to ask you what this emotional austerity means, because I'm not able to get a hang on that. And he said, have you seen Kumar Gandharva sing Nirguni bhajans? Have you seen the others sing Nirguni bhajans, the well-known musicians or even others? He says they try to make it ornamental. They put murkis, thans, and even alapi into it. They make it catchy and attractive. Kumarji just sings. He makes it as bare as he can make it. So it almost looks like Kabir is talking to us. And he says, that is emotional austerity. And that is what I meant. Okay. Yes, I agree with the CP and Sudeep that a poem needs emotion, any art needs emotion, craft, and content, all three equally. But all these three, we should know how to peel off.
Sure.
Everything, that is the haikai lens I'm talking about. I'm not talking about other poetry. I'm talking about haiku, where we're talking about the wordless poem. The words are so simple that they just drop away, and what strikes you is the image. And if that is possible, then, I mean, we don't have to search far. Even if you go into Indian philosophy and we go deep into it, they say neti, neither this, neither that. You go on peeling the layers like the layers of an onion till you come to the pure non-dual consciousness. We're not talking about that now, but the concept is what we use in haiku. Even with a 6-word poem, we spend a whole day editing it. You might laugh, what is there to edit in a 6-word poem? But we do that so that nothing ever is wasted or redundant. Everything has its say and it is just there. So if you see that way, I would say emotional austerity is what we follow. Most of the haiku poets follow, but we don't use that term now because you're asking me, I'm just using that term. But it is that, the brevity, the conciseness, and the succinctness is what I think makes the poem emotion come across to the other person.
Kala,
I'm going to-
this is something that any good poetry, whichever
Yes,
form follows,
absolutely.
because you are such an exponent of haikai and the waka form, you're flying the flag very proudly of just that one strain. I
Very
would
true.
say,
Very
I
true.
would I would say the same, because I don't want the
But you
audience to
know,
get
but Sudeep,
I don't want to.
Sudeep, but
No,
Sudeep, we don't use adjectives that much.
I know, I understand. I know that tradition very well.
Yeah.
There's a whole section of one of my books which uses all different kinds of, and it's a very, very tough thing to do if you try and attempt it, especially all the different kinds of Japanese form.
Yes.
But what I was going to say is the audience shouldn't get a wrong impression, because you use the same philosophy for even
Yes.
long epic poetry. Think
Very
of
true.
Milton, think of Walcott, think of Joseph Brodsky's To Urania. They are very, very tightly crafted long lines. You use the same sort of thing. There is no room for excess.
Redundancy.
It's a question of which dance you're dancing. Whether it's Bollywood or it's classical Bharatanatyam, or is it just Robindra Sangeet dance in the puja pandals. So for each one of them, you have to wear a certain kind of garb, and the garb is told to us by the equivalent of Natya Shastra, let's put it.
Yes, yes.
But the fact is, what we are trying to say is all that is fine. But how do you create that table or chair that CP is talking about anew? The only way to do it is to make disturbing waves. And what CP was talking about, disturbance or dissonance, is not different from tranquility. It's just the yin-yang side of the same thing.
Absolutely.
Dissonance and tranquility are really the two sides of the same coin. Breathing in and breathing out. What is that? One is expansion, one is contraction, one is destruction, one is recreation. The cosmic order will follow the same larger pattern. But for the purposes of poetry, since we're talking about poetry, we have to make things that are already been made beautifully by whoever it is who's come before us. To make it anew is very, very hard, which is why just to replicate what is there becomes, to me, I find it boring, because I get bored of my own stuff. If I do my next book, which is the same as the last book, I know it's safe.
Of course, yes.
But people love it. People, that's the way things are done. And so that's why I think it's very important to break these molds. At the same time, keep the foundation strong.
Very true.
What about, remember Louis Kahn, he's, in this wonderful book, Silences and something. So he says the brick basically one day decides to, he's talking to the architect back. He says, why are you stacking me in one column and in rectangular format? Today, I wish to be an arch. My wish today is to be an arch. Now you do what you want to do. So imagine a square brick to make it into an arch. You have to kind of cut it. It's the old architectural, well, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that, sir. Let's quickly move to our next question. We are running a little short of time, so I will go through this a little faster. When we talk about the prominence of Indian poetry, the one name that comes to everybody's mind is Rabindranath Tagore. What impact has he had in your writings, in your journey as a poet? CP sir, can we start with you? Sir, you are on mute.
I think Tagore is a highly overrated poet. I don't know. I read him in English. Gitanjali is a highly overrated poet. A prayer song to deliver the India from British establishment. And I think I hope I'm not wrong here. Yeats had a rather clumsy but longish forward or introduction to that collection, which 1910 or 1912. And later, Yeats actually came up with 4 lines which rhymed the word, Tagore's poetry with rubbish. So, but I'm not trying to take anything away from Tagore. He's a giant of a cultural icon, and I think Bengal has actually suffered as much as benefited from his shadow. Uh, Tagore has not influenced me at all. His short stories are brilliant, especially those stories which have to do with summer vacation. I think it's called young boys and girls. The children's stories are beautiful. But his poetry, in translation at least to me, I find it boring, really. So he has not really influenced me at all. I think there are very few people who have actually, shaped my writing, and this is actually a point which I can't deliberate or explain with any sense of clarity, because at one level, everything that you read, which is good, shapes you, right? But when you think of it over the years, you can still recall only a very few names. So I have not really thought about how that has, actually shaped my writing for what it is worth. But Tagore is not one of them.
Okay. Kala ma'am, I would give
Well,
Sudeep sir for last for this one.
oh, okay. Um, See, as I told you, I was more into music throughout my childhood days and later. But I did happen to go to the Chennai Theosophical Society. And the first book I took of Tagore was Stray Birds. And somehow I was so fascinated with the verses there. When I read the forward, it said, these are haiku-like poems. I didn't even know the existence of haiku that time. Maybe I did go for simplicity and clear language. Maybe I didn't like, and that was what he had. And this I still remember, if you shed tears when you miss the sun, you also miss the stars. Maybe I saw it from a woman's angle. I don't know what it is, or maybe I'm talking about 30 years back. It was Chennai was a very, very calm and collected place. And that is why there are so many things that affect you when you're reading something. And the first poem, stray birds of summer come to my window to sing and fly away. And yellow leaves of autumn, which have no songs, flutter and fall there with a sigh. Yes, it is 25, 20, 29, 30 words, and I wouldn't say this is a haiku at all, but he never said it was haiku, and that was the beauty of it. And so then later, when I came into haiku, I felt that there is something about simplicity, and maybe that is why I like Kumar Gandharva's style also. Maybe the way he sang the bhajan. See, all of us gravitate to the way we want to be, or our art we want our art to be. So I think when I'm writing haiku now, and I write something which is brief and still tells something to the reader, I'm happy about it. And I would say that people like Tagore, Kabir, and then Gorakhnath, I've done a lot of his bhajans, simple, stating things so plainly, and then working with the Kumar Gandharva style, which was a very, very robust style, very vigorous style, but clear. There was no complication in that style. And maybe that is what I liked. And I would say, yes, Tagore influenced me a lot, even though I was just read the English translation, which everyone says is not a good translation at all, because his Bengali was much better.
Sure. So Sudeep sir.
Well, I know why you were waiting for me, because I'm the token Bengali here. So one of the problems of being a Bengali is that you are expected to fly the Tagore flags high. And as a youngster, I really couldn't understand Tagore very well, even though Tagore was pouring out of every orifice around me. I grew up in a very, very typical Bengali family with poetry, music, the arts. I'm grateful for that. And Tagore was the sort of swan song around me. But the poets I was gravitating more towards were people like Jivananand Budash, who was a modernist poet, who was more like Paul Celan and so on. Having said that, much, much later in my adult life, I did start appreciating Tagore much more. Because initially, what was coming to me, especially as an English language poet, there was a problem because the Gitanjali translation which he did was just unreadable. And every other translation I read of him was unreadable until William Radice came along and did sort of halfway modern translation, but even that was not adequate to my mind. You read the original Bangla, it's very different. But before I answer that, I'm just going to read this little quote, because you were talking about simplicity and what Tagore did and what a modern poet like Chesterov Milosz did. I bookend this because it uses the same image, but he does it in few words. This is set in the same kind of context as we've gone through, like a world war. This was written after the Second World War. And Milosz says, "My generation was lost, cities too, and nations. But all that a little later. Meanwhile, in the window, a swallow." So, we have to sort of, the wise simplicity is what we are talking about. But when we talk about Tagore, he's one of the best modern painters, for instance. The side which was discovered much, much later. His prose is exceptional. His poetry within the confines of a certain tradition of Bengali poetry is also beautiful, because a lot of it is also sung out aloud. But with a modern ear, it becomes problematic because he doesn't use the same meter and cadences. It's of a particular time. And then, of course, his social writing and so on. He was a polymath. I mean, when you talk about Rabindranath Tagore, he should be talked about as a polymath. Just when you talk about him as a poet, you're actually doing him disservice, which is where we are going wrong.
Sure, sir.
If you read, he was an amazing philosopher. Try and read this wonderful book, which is Cambridge University Press brought it out about 20, 30 years ago. It's the letters that Albert Einstein and Tagore wrote to each other. Incredible. I mean, that's all you need to read if you don't want to read any other book. One is a Nobel laureate in physics or particle or light or fractals. And the other one, accidentally, I think I'll be cut, but accidentally won the Nobel Prize because of Mr. Yeats feeling rather disillusioned in the post-industrial age in England and thought this white beard, mystical garb person is providing some kind of solace to his, everything about the whole thing was misplaced. But when you actually read the letters between the two, and William Rothenstein, the sculptor, was also very much part of that Bloomsbury group. You see the kind of clarity of thought and the sharpness of intellect. So Tagore, in that sense, didn't ever influence me at all. I'm really sorry to say, as a Bengali, but as a cultural icon, as an educationist, as a figure, yes, very much part of the larger fabric of me growing up. Because the Tagore songs were always sung around me. The poems were read out by my parents. My mother danced to many of the dance dramas. And like Kala, I'm particularly interested in classical Indian dance and music. My next book is called The Whispering Anklet, Payal. And the entire book is 35 years of aggregation and response to classical Indian dance. Dance. So it's a space that allows you to kind of think both tonally as well as otherwise, both through silence as well as dissonance.
This is a question to Sudeep. This is a question to Sudeep and Kala and Kapil. Is that, and this is not really central to the debate, but I cannot shrug off this feeling that Tagore was a bit of a pose here. Was he I'm not saying he's a fake, but that whole thing about beard and all that that toga kind of thing, and presenting himself as something out of some sort of a story kind of thing, a fable. He's presenting himself as a kind of a fable. Is that true, or is it just one
I
of my?
think, I don't know, before Sudeep answers, I would say everyone has a way of projecting themselves. Kumarji had a way of projecting himself. There was a lot of drama when he was on stage, in spite of his pure sword that he used to hit and the way he sang. But there was so much the way, like Kishori Amonkar used to cover herself like this and bend down and used to sing. I think we all project, like all dancers, I've seen so many dancers. I think every artist, like MF Hussain, every artist has a way he wants to project, she wants to project herself. Is MF Hussain, when I heard about him walking barefoot in Bombay and sitting on the Jahangir Art Palace and Jahangir Art Gallery, I used to wonder, why is he sitting? Is Bombay a place to walk barefooted? But he did it. And why he did it till his death. So I think we should leave that much. The way the artist wants to project himself must be left alone with that. That's what I might feel.
Yeah, I would go along with Kala. I'm not going to put too much weight on the garb and the beard, because that's
usual. I find isolated. That's okay.
No. It's not that. Maybe it's like me. I have 13 black shirts and 13 pants, and that's all I wear. I mean, am I making a statement? No, that's all I have. Tagore probably just wore, didn't have a shaving kit and just had gowns.
Why is that? Why do you wear black only? What's the reason?
It's just convenient. Simple. You don't have to think.
So I think, sir, some people say
it's a very, very banal, unpoetic answer, but that's the truth.
Well, that probably gives more space for you to think about everything else. That may actually
Precisely. Thank you. As the moderator, you saw through it.
That's true.
I just never have to think about one huge part of people's life, which is clothes.
Yeah.
So, sir, I'm a t-shirt and a shorts guy. This is what I'm wearing even right now. So
you're wearing your shorts, but I don't want you to tell us whether you are or not. Zoom has strange tendencies.
And to answer your question, CP sir, as somebody who writes, I mean, I'm an author. I have never been a poet, so I'm not giving this answer as a non-poet. I think people have a lot of enigma. Even the simplest of brains, even the simplest of people have a lot of enigma, a lot of complicated scenarios about them. And Rabindranath Tagore wasn't even a simple man. I mean, there were layers and layers and layers. I think it's more a question of the projection that comes to us when we are interfacing with that person's writings, poems.
I get you. But who actually wears, parts hair at the center, and what is central parting about Tagore's hair is all about?
Sir, I know Sudeep ji will love this answer. Modi ji did it for a couple of months.
About 80 years back.
No, nothing is wrong with that. I'm just asking the reasons
why.
No,
you're talking about 80 years back when things might have been. My uncle had a parting in the center.
Nobody had central herring apart from Aurobindo and this guy. No one was.
No, my uncle had in Chennai. My uncle had a parting in the center.
Anyway, it's the least important part of Tagore. I think we can dispense with his hair and his dress. Yes, I think let's celebrate the fact that he really was a genius. Truly,
that I think nobody can argue with. In his own right, in his own way. For some as a poet, for some as a writer, for some as a thinker.
No, I would just emphasize: think of him as a polymath. Poetry is one very marginal part of his oeuvre.
Yes,
that's right.
Not a very important part.
Yeah. So I'm so sorry to cut you in the middle, but we have run way out of time.
Yes.
And I think we should really end this session here. There is the next session that is going to start right away. I want to sincerely thank all three of you for coming on today. Our audience would love this interaction. They would, of course, love the poems that they heard in the beginning, but even the interaction, and the candidness with which we discussed, I think will be just brilliant. Thank you so much for this.